be me, 26, single again. Breakups are supposed to be messy. That's what I told myself at least. Tears, shouting, long-winded text messages sent at 2 in the morning. Drama. But when I ended things with him, there was none of that. No begging me to stay, no accusations, no drunken I miss you calls at 3 a.m. It was just silence. And I remember thinking, of course. Typical man. I'm in the kind of friend circle that made breakups into rallying cries. Every Friday night over wine, we'd swap stories about the guys who didn't deserve us. My own story fit neatly into that script. He wasn't abusive, wasn't cheating, wasn't even overtly cruel. He was just quiet. Too quiet. Like he was always half elsewhere. I'd catch him zoning out during conversations, staring at the floor like the tiles held the answers to life. I'd be pouring my heart out about work drama or some podcast I'd listened to, and he'd nod, absent, like his body was in the room but his mind had slipped out the window. And that, more than anything, felt like betrayal. I wanted to be adored. I wanted to be his whole world. Instead, I got a boyfriend who sometimes felt like a roommate. So I ended it. One calm conversation at his apartment. I said I needed more, and he didn't fight me on it. He just sat there, silent for a long time, then said, "Okay, if that's what you want." I remember feeling this rush of indignation. No, please don't go. No, I'll change. No outpouring of love. Just acceptance. And that stung worse than if he'd screamed at me. It confirmed what I already believed. Men don't feel things the way we do. They walk away without looking back. When he didn't text me afterward, didn't try to check in, I doubled down on the story. To my friends, I said, "See, this is how men are. Detached. Heartless. They just move on." They nodded knowingly, each of them armed with their own stories of being discarded, minimized, forgotten. They fully built this chorus of validation, and I sang along loudly. Sometimes, late at night, I'd picture his apartment. I'd lived in that space for almost 2 years, cooked in that kitchen, fought in that living room, slept on that bed. The silence of it pressed on me. I imagined him sprawled out, remote in hand, already watching Netflix with some new girl. And I'd roll my eyes in the dark, muttering, "Men, they always bounce back faster." Still, there was a strange hollowness to it. I thought I'd feel lighter, freer once I was out. But walking past his place on my way to work felt like walking by a graveyard. Curtains drawn, balcony empty, the air heavy. Something about that quiet unsettled me, though I wouldn't admit it out loud. Instead, I shrugged it off and repeated the mantra I clung to like armor. He didn't care. He never did. Women always hurt more. Men just move on. I thought I knew the truth, but I had no idea. The first week after the breakup, I told myself I was fine. More than fine. I was thriving. I filled my calendar with brunches, happy hours, and impromptu shopping trips. My friends were eager to keep me busy, and I leaned into it. "See," I told them, swirling my mimosa one Saturday morning, "this is what men don't get. Women process. We feel the grief, and then we rebuild." But at night, when the buzz of conversation faded and my apartment went quiet, the silence crept in. It was uncanny, like his absence had a sound all its own. Not loud, not disruptive, but a heavy kind of nothingness that pressed at the edges of my mind. Every time I picked up my phone, I expected a message, even if it was just a curt, "Hope you're well." But nothing came. I turned that nothingness into fuel for my narrative. "See?" I muttered to myself as I scrolled through Instagram. "He doesn't care. If he did, he'd check in. He'd fight." To my friends, I made jokes about how quickly men move on. "He's probably already on Tinder, swiping away like a robot." I'd laugh, though the thought of it made something sour twist in my stomach. The weeks slipped by in this rhythm. Outward confidence, inward unease. Every time I checked my phone and saw no missed calls, I felt a strange blend of vindication and disappointment. It was proof of my story, that men were detached, emotionally stunted. But there was also a flicker of something else, something harder to name. Loneliness? Regret? I shoved those words down. One evening, about 3 weeks after the breakup, I walked home from dinner with a coworker. My path took me past his apartment building. I hadn't planned it that way, but my feet carried me there like they had unfinished business. The building looked the same, but different. The warm yellow glow that used to spill from his living room window was gone. The balcony where we once sat on summer mornings sipping coffee and teasing each other about who snored louder was bare. No plants, no ashtray, no chairs. Just an empty slab of concrete. I stopped on the sidewalk and stared up. The curtains were drawn tight, like whoever lived there wanted the world to stay out. My chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. Cold, I muttered under my breath, shaking my head. Men just shut the door and never look back. It was easier to believe that than to consider any other explanation. I imagined him sprawled on the couch, feet up, TV flickering, laughing with some new girl. It stung, but it made sense. That's what men do, right? Replace, not grieve. At least that's what I told myself as I kept walking. Later that night, I vented to my friends in our group chat. I typed out a paragraph about how unfair it felt. That women cry, process, mourn, while men coast through life unaffected. The replies came fast. Preach. Men don't have the emotional depth to feel what we feel. That's why women suffer more. We actually love deeper. I clung to their words like a safety net. They made me feel righteous, strong. But the truth was, I didn't feel strong at all. I felt restless, uneasy, because beneath the chorus of affirmations, the silence from him gnawed at me. It wasn't angry silence, or awkward silence, or the kind of silence that leaves an opening for reconciliation. It was absolute, a void, and the longer it stretched on, the more unnatural it felt, like something was wrong. But I didn't let myself say that out loud. Instead, I kept the armor on. Sarcasm, eye rolls, casual dismissals. Because admitting I missed him, or worse, that I worried about him, felt like betraying the whole feminist narrative I wrapped myself in. Women are the victims. Women hurt more. Women are the ones left behind. Men? Men just move on. At least that's what I repeated as the silence grew louder and louder. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, which is probably why it cut so deep. There was nothing dramatic about the setting, just a small cafe near the office, one of those cozy places with chipped mugs and indie music humming through the speakers. I'd met up with a mutual friend, someone we'd both known from college. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and I thought the catch-up would be easy, casual. For the first half hour, it was. We talked about work, about the weather, about a new restaurant opening downtown. I laughed at his stories and stirred sugar into my coffee, feeling relieved that the conversation stayed light. Then, almost without warning, it shifted. "Have you talked to him lately?" my friend asked, voice tentative. I blinked, caught off guard. No. Why would I? My tone came out sharper than I intended, like I had to defend myself. He hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of his mug. You didn't hear then?" My stomach tightened. Hear what? For a moment, he didn't answer. His eyes darted toward the window, like he was hoping for an escape route. Then he finally looked back at me, and his expression made my pulse spike. It was that look people wear when they're about to deliver bad news, the kind that rearranges your world. "He's gone," he said. He took his own life." The words didn't register at first. It was like my brain rejected them outright. "What?" I said, almost laughing. "No, no." "You're kidding." But he wasn't kidding. His eyes didn't waver. I felt my whole body go cold, like someone had opened a window inside me and let the winter pour in. My hands trembled around the coffee cup. The noise of the cafe clinking dishes, low chatter, the faint hum of the music, all collapsed into a dull roar in my ears. "What do you mean he's gone?" I whispered. "I mean," my friend said, voice breaking. He killed himself a couple of weeks ago." And just like that, the silence I had mocked for so long slammed into me with unbearable weight. All those nights I'd scrolled through my phone, sneering at his lack of messages. All the times I'd imagined him already with someone else, laughing, moving on. None of it was real. His silence wasn't indifference. It wasn't heartlessness. It was collapse. I sat there in shock, staring at the table, tears stinging my eyes before I even realized I was crying. My friend reached across and touched my arm gently, but I barely felt it. My mind was a reel of images I didn't want to see. His apartment, the darkened balcony, the drawn curtains. I had thought he was shutting the world out because he didn't care. But maybe he was shutting it out because he couldn't bear to let it in. I whispered, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" He sighed. "I thought you knew. I assumed someone would have said something." The guilt hit me like a tidal wave. How many times had I laughed about him moving on with my friends? How many times had I told myself he was heartless, detached? And the whole time, he had been gone. Not to someone else, not to some new fling, just gone. The cafe around me blurred as my chest heaved with quiet sobs. I tried to hold them back, ashamed of breaking down in public, but it was impossible. My friend rubbed his face with his hands, clearly hurting too. "I just don't understand," I choked out. "He seemed fine. He didn't fight me when I left. He looked at me sadly. Maybe that was the problem. I sat in silence, shaking, the weight of it pressing me down. For the first time, I realized how little I had really known about his inner world. I had been so quick to write the silence as proof of not caring, so eager to paint him as the heartless one. But the truth was far more devastating. His silence wasn't about moving on, it wasn't about forgetting me, it was about disappearing. In the days after that cafe conversation, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, phone clutched in my hand, as though maybe, just maybe, his name would flash across the screen and prove it all a cruel mistake. But it never did. Instead, I spiraled. I needed answers, needed to know why. The silence that had once felt smugly explainable now pressed against me like a suffocating fog. I reached back out to the mutual friend, desperate, practically begging, "Tell me everything, please!" And he did. Piece by piece, like unraveling a knot, he gave me fragments of the life my ex had been living after I left. He'd lost his job months earlier but hadn't told me. I remembered him growing quieter around that time, more distracted, but I chalked it up to his usual aloofness. He was drowning in debt, my friend said, barely able to keep up with rent. On top of that, he was helping his mother, paying her bills when she couldn't manage, running errands when her health faltered. All of it in silence. When I left, it wasn't just a breakup. It was, as my friend put it, the last good thing in his life snapping. And I hated how true that sounded. He told me once, my friend said softly, that you made it bearable. Even if you two fought, even if you were upset with him, you made it lighter for him, happier, for a while. The words split me open, because I remembered how often I'd accused him of being too quiet, of not doing enough for me, of not making me feel special. I'd wanted him to be my anchor. But all the while, I'd been his, and I hadn't even known it. Then came the detail that gutted me most. He wrote messages, my friend said, eyes dark, long ones, to you, but he never sent them. I saw one on his phone before everything. It said, "I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this. I didn't want to drag you down with me." I couldn't breathe when I heard that. My throat locked up, and all I could think about were the countless times I'd stared at my silent phone, cursing him for not texting me. He had written to me. He had wanted to reach out, but he deleted the words, convinced that silence was kinder than pulling me into his collapse. And I had mocked that silence, laughed about it with friends, rolled my eyes, and called him heartless. My friend went on, explaining how he'd stopped showing up to interviews, stopped returning calls. He'd withdrawn so completely that people assumed he just needed time. No one realized how deep the hole had gotten until it was too late. The image of his apartment seared itself into my mind, the one I'd walked past weeks earlier, lights off, curtains drawn. I had seen that darkness and told myself it was proof he didn't care. But the truth was so much more devastating. The apartment had been a cave of despair. The silence wasn't careless, it was the sound of someone disappearing piece by piece. There was no dramatic note, no tidy explanation left behind. Just silence. The same silence I had weaponized in my own head. For the first time, I let myself say it. I was wrong. I had wanted him to prove his love by chasing me, begging me, refusing to let me go. But maybe love had looked different for him. Maybe, in his brokenness, love was not burdening me with his pain. Love was letting me go so I wouldn't be dragged under too. The thought cut deeper than anything else. I left that second conversation numb, walking home through streets that felt foreign. Every couple holding hands, every man laughing with friends, every flicker of normal life around me felt like a cruel reminder. How many of them were hiding the same darkness? How many were one quiet step away from an ending no one saw coming? I had always told myself that women hurt more, that women carried the weight of love and loss. But now, for the first time, I glimpsed a truth I'd never let myself consider. Men suffer too, often silently, invisibly, and sometimes fatally. The silence wasn't about moving on, it was about giving up. That night, I went back to my own apartment and just sat on the floor in the dark. The silence felt different now, heavier, sharper, almost hostile. I'd spent weeks telling myself silence meant indifference, but now I knew it had meant collapse. And I couldn't stop hearing the echo of it in every corner of my own home. I replayed every smug thing I'd said to my friends, every eye roll, every joke about how men bounce back faster. The comments had felt empowering at the time, like I was reclaiming my dignity after a breakup. Now they felt grotesque, like I had mocked a drowning man for not swimming fast enough. My mind kept circling back to his apartment, that balcony where we'd shared morning coffee, legs tangled under a blanket, sunlight warming our faces. The curtains I'd seen drawn, the lights that never came on. I couldn't unsee it now. The quiet wasn't coldness, it was despair. A cave he'd crawled into, alone, until it swallowed him whole. And I had walked by muttering men just shut the door and never looked back. The guilt was relentless. I wanted to tell myself I couldn't have known, that his pain wasn't my responsibility. And maybe that was true. But part of me couldn't shake the thought, what if I had reached out, just once? What if I hadn't dismissed the silence as proof he didn't care? Would he still be here? The questions gnawed at me until they became unbearable. I started pulling away from the group chat with my friends. Every time someone made a flippant comment about how men don't feel as deeply, I found myself going quiet. Before, I would have jumped in, adding my own examples to the pile. Now I just stared at the screen, remembering his unfinished text. I didn't want to drag you down with me. It was the most selfless thing he'd ever said, and he never even sent it. I still believe women hurt in breakups. I know the sleepless nights, the sting of rejection, the ache of missing someone who once filled your life. That pain is real. I lived it. But I can't unsee the truth I stumbled into. Men hurt too. Sometimes in silence so complete that no one notices until it's too late. And the worst part is, they're not allowed to say it. Society trains them to be stoic, to man up, to bury pain deep where no one can see. We celebrate women for crying, venting, processing. But when men go quiet, we assume it's because they don't care, when really, sometimes it's because they can't speak without breaking. I don't renounce my beliefs. I still believe in feminism, in equality, in defending women's voices. But now there's a crack in my worldview, a jagged line I can't smooth over. Because for all the times I insisted men have it easier, I can't stop thinking about him, alone, unraveling and invisible in his suffering. I wish I could go back to that night I left his apartment. I wish I had looked closer when he just said, okay. I wish I had heard the weight in his voice instead of dismissing it as indifference. But wishing doesn't change the fact that his apartment is empty now. Completely, irreversibly empty. And that's the image that won't leave me. Not the laughter, not the mornings together, not the 1,000 small moments we once shared. What stays with me is the balcony with no chairs, the curtains pulled shut, the silence pressing like a wall. It's the picture of everything I misunderstood. It's the picture of a man who didn't move on, but gave up. And now, every time I hear someone joke about men being heartless after a breakup, I feel that cold silence rise up in me again. I see the empty apartment, and I know, in a way I can never unknow, that silence doesn't always mean absence of love. Sometimes it means the absence of hope. Be you. Watch Green Tech Stories every night. Forget to subscribe. Missing out on tomorrow's story.